So the big problem with ownership is liability. You know, anytime you own something, you have liability, you have risk of loss. And so what I would submit to you is anytime that we have ownership in notes, we don't have the same liability. So we have a note. Well, how do you have repair on a note? How do you have maintenance on a note? How do you have vandalism or slip and fall lawsuits or squatters in a note? Well, there's just no way to do that, which is why I've always said I would be super happy if everything that I own fit in a file cabinet, right? What you have with a note is the chance of default where you have to own something, and then you possibly have the risk of ownership, okay? Ownership and liability are two sides of the same coin. So anytime that we get a chance, we don't want to own if we can help it. We want ownership of notes without ownership in property, and that's what the sub-3 transaction does for us. Now, this guy may not look it, but this guy is the guy who started me in real estate back 10, 12 years ago, and he is a financial wizard, okay? His name's David Alexander. He's based out of Dallas, and David is who really taught me transactions. He taught me how to deal structure, okay? And I've added my own stuff through the years, and certainly I have a negotiation platform that's far different, but David really started me in this business. And, you know, basically how the story happened, this was even prior to Bigger Pockets. So before Bigger Pockets, you had a real estate forum called flippinghomes.com. And flippinghomes.com was, there was about 100 people there. And you had David, you had Sean McCluskey, who just came to the Nashville RIA. You had Steve Cook, who was one of the big wholesaler guys in Baltimore. And you had Mitch Stephen, who was also an owner financier, okay? And David would say these very cryptic things like never buy unless you sell. And he talk about notes and yield and cash flow and all these things that, I mean, I had no clue of what it was. I was probably 21, 22 years old, and I was selling real estate at the time. I was going through college, and my undergraduate I was working on was accounting. So I understood some of the concepts of finance, but the things that he was talking about, I was just like, man, this is just unbelievable. And so I ended up sending him a private message in that forum, and he was like, well, just call me. And I couldn't believe it because, I mean, he was on the RIA circuit at the time. So, I mean, for him to take time out of what was probably a pretty decently late night at the time was, I thought, really, really interesting. And he's the one that created the sub-3 transaction. So I did not personally come up with this. I'm far not smart enough to come up with this. All right. So, but I do have his permission to share it. And David's become a great friend of mine. He's been on the podcast, and we talk every week or two. So the first thing I want to do is really just go over the sub-2 wrap and have a really clear understanding of that. And from a sub-2 wrap, then we can go and talk about the sub-3 model and really how it's different. Okay. So some of this is already in the training, but just to kind of recap. So we have a seller that calls us. Okay. And here we are. We're the investor. And we're there to buy a house. Okay. We negotiate a sub-2 transaction. And so what that means is this is transaction A, is they're giving the deed to us. Okay. That's ownership. And we're giving a note to them, which is a promise to pay in the future. All right. So we're buy and sell investors. We're not buy and hold investors. And so once we have this part A transaction done, then what are we going to do? We're going to go ahead and sell the property. All right. So we go and we market for our buyer. And basically the same thing happens in reverse. So we have a note that goes to us, and we have the deed that goes back to the buyer in that case. So, I mean, here's the thing. At the end of the day, we're in the middle. Okay. So we have put ourselves in a situation where we have a note to our seller. And yes, we have a note from our buyer in this situation, but we're still, from a legal perspective, on the hook for that deal, for that note. Now, one thing that people do is they just get the deed and they don't give a promise to pay to our seller. I don't know that that's really much of a distinction, because if you get in front of a judge, like we'll talk about later, you know, you're on the chain of title, and it's almost an obvious fact that there's a promise to pay there. Okay. Especially if you have a seller that is good at creating remorse on the stand, then this is a real issue, okay? And you also have the issue that we own a house. So with the deed, here comes ownership. It's everything that we talked about here of ownership and liability, the issue of maintenance, issue of repairs, squatters. Guys, I just had a house on a house that we're actually retailing out of. And I was in Hawaii back in December, and we get a call. My wife gets a call because she's a realtor on this transaction. As a listing agent, we get a call that there's squatters in the house, and like that buyer's agent can't even show the house. So with ownership comes liability. In this transaction, guys, in this A part of this transaction, we own the house. So there's a period of time where we have ownership, we have liability. And what I would submit to you is if we can keep away from that, then we're going to be better off. Okay. Now there's certainly times when we take title. Okay. We can't make the sub-3 transaction work because there's a foreclosure date in 7 days or 10 days. Like, yeah, I mean, sometimes we take title and we have to do what we have to do. But overall, there's a better way than this transaction. We're stuck in the middle. We're guaranteeing payments to our seller. We have ownership. We have liability. We don't want this. Okay. If we can keep from this, then it's the best thing for everyone. So like I said, problems with sub-2, we've guaranteed payments to our seller. We have liability on the house. And the thing that I haven't talked about really is selective memory sellers. So you'll have situations where even in the most obvious of situations, people either remember what they want to remember or they just flat out lie. Okay. And so we kind of have to protect ourselves from these situations as much as we can, as often as we can, because we're going to get put in these situations really one way or the other. So let's go through the sub-3 transaction. So we've gone through subject 2 and we're selling with owner financing. We're getting a wrap deal, but we're kind of stuck in the middle. So how can we circumvent this? And, the story with David, he was a big lease option guy for a while. He was buying subject 2 and he's lease optioning everything. He had like 70 or so properties at the time. And basically he was negative cash flow. And it was negative cash flow like 14 or so thousand a month. So he was eating cash. He had equity everywhere, but he was eating cash. And he was just like, I'm not going to survive this. I've hesitated to sell the house and give buyers the deed, but I just can't do this anymore. I'm going to lose these houses anyway. So he sold all the houses with owner financing. He went from being 14,000 negative per month to 14,000 positive in about 120 days. Okay. So that's kind of the light bulb that came on for him. And like I said, he's kind of taught me a lot of my deal structure stuff. But he had this issue with the sub-2 wrap. It's like, how can we abstain from liability in this transaction, stay away from ownership, and still suck the profit from the transaction? And so what he came up with first was, well, maybe we just start a brokerage. And then we have like a floating commission rate on the listing agreement. And we do it that way. But he's like, that'll never pass the smell test with the judge, the real estate commission, all of this. And then he kind of came to it and he was like, the two things that will never go away are assignment of contracts and owner financing. It's like, that's as old as this country is. Assignment of contracts, owner financing. So this is the sub-3 transaction. We have a seller. And we have us as the investor. So we do a PSA to purchase, okay? Just like any other standard transaction. But in line 19 in our standard contract, like you guys have in the asset section of the training, what it says there is, in the event of an assignment of contract, any profit, whether by cash, trade, or note, is retained by the buyer at closing, okay? So that's kind of the difference. So what we do in this situation is we get a purchase and sale agreement signed, and then we tell our seller we're going to market to find our buyer. Okay. So then we have a buyer. Okay. And we have a PSA to sell. This is to buy. So in the training, guys, those are two different documents. So don't use your PSA to buy to go and sell with owner financing. Okay. It's two different contracts. So we have two contracts there. And so what we do is we take both contracts to our title company or our closing attorney, We just tell them, look, we want our seller to close directly with our buyer. And so here's what happens is there's only one transaction. The deed goes directly to the buyer. The note goes directly to the seller. And then per line 19 in our agreement, this note and also the down payment in this transaction is then assigned to us. So let me stop there. So I've been going for about 15, 20 minutes. Any questions on this right now? Feel free to speak up. I'm going to take a sip of soda here in just a second.
This is Chuck. I'm assuming you're going to unpack that some more, so I'm waiting.
Yeah, I can definitely do that, but did you have a specific question I can touch on?
No, not yet.
Okay, cool. Anybody else?
Is there something different about how you collect the assignment for that? Does that make sense?
Somewhat. Can you kind of expound on that for me?
I'm trying because I'm trying to wrap my mind around this.
Wrap, no pun intended, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I might be just tripping myself up here and overcomplicating it, because the note, you're basically doing an A transaction instead of an A-B transaction.
Correct.
And then how do you collect?
Okay, great.
Yeah, is the bones of that.
Yeah, so basically this is, like you said, an A to B transaction. Okay, so our seller's closing with our buyer. All right. The fun part of this is that we never own the house. Okay, so we don't have ownership, we don't have liability. And we're still assigned the profits, because per line 19 in our purchase and sale agreement to buy, then it says that in the event of an assignment of contract, we're assigned profits, whether by cash, trade, or note. So cash is the down payment. Trade would be in lieu of a down payment. Like I received a 1949 Mercury car one time. That was actually on my second deal ever as a down payment one time. I ended up selling it for 10 grand cash. And I tried to sell it on payments, but people just had cash. I was like, well, okay, that's fine. But and then the note obviously is the note. So cash, trade, note are the three things that were assigned at closing based on how the transaction goes. Okay. The difference in this is a few things. Okay. Like you said, it's not a seller to us to buyer. So we're not caught in the middle. And the whole issue of payments, liability, and selective memory sellers starts to really go away. All right. In terms of collection, we're assigned that note. So when we're assigned something, that means we own it. So it's very similar to if Bank of America was buying a package of notes from Fargo, then there would be an assignment of note and deed of trust, or an assignment of note and mortgage, depending on the state. And that package would be sold from one to the other. So that assignment is recorded, and that's the only piece of paperwork that we show up on is an assignment. That's it. Okay. We're not on the HUD. We're not on any notes. We're not on anything. Okay. So I'm going to erase this and put my first deal ever on the board. Okay. So the sub 3 transaction works on really low equity deals. Okay. And in 2010, there was almost no way to really go and wholesale. Like wholesaling all but did not exist. I mean, it did in certain markets, but generally across the country, it's not the craze that it is now. And you think about it, it's like, well, why is that? Well, almost nobody had equity. Like it was so bad in certain markets, especially like Las Vegas, Phoenix, California, Florida. I mean, the market was so bad, there was no equity to buy. So there's certainly no equity to wholesale. So I had a seller call me, and their mortgage was $97,000. The arrears was $0. The repair was probably $10,000. The ARV was probably like 115. Okay. And The walkaway money was zero. All right, so it was a divorce situation. They just wanted out. Okay. So I am the Mr. Investor guy, and somehow I get this property under contract. I really, frankly, don't know how. I think I could have been anybody because they were so motivated, and I was as green as could be and scared to death. So I was terrible at everything that I did. I mean, absolutely everything. But I got a PSA to buy. And then I had line 19 there that allowed me, in the event of an assignment, to get the profit, whether by cash, trade, or note. Okay. Then I went and I found a buyer. I remember it took me 3 days. Okay. My first, as a side note, my first phone call on this deal was from my seller. And I put the marketing out, and I was scared to death that he would call me and realize that I was buying it for 97. I was going to owner finance it for 135. All right. And so the conversation went something like this. And for those of you that are concerned about your sellers understanding what you make, then this is a good story for you. So I get the phone call and I see it's Mr. Seller, and my heart just kind of sinks because I'm thinking, oh gosh, here we go. Because I literally just put the marketing out like 15 minutes prior. Okay. And so I enter, and the conversation goes something like this. He said, Brad, I see that you have a sign in my yard. Yes, that's right. And I called the number. Okay. You're owner financing this house for $135,000. And so at this point, I couldn't tell if he was upset with me or not. And I was like, yeah. And he said, well, I want to talk to you about this. I'm like, okay. He said, now my daughter's needing a house. Do you think that you could owner finance a deal to her? And I was thinking, this is just unbelievable. So here's this guy trying to find me a buyer for his family member. And then I ended up having to tell this guy, like, well, sorry, your daughter doesn't qualify because she doesn't have a reasonable down payment. But anyway, long story short, it took me 3 days, and I found a buyer. So their down payment was $20,000. That's what they had. It was a husband and wife, and they were both nurses. So, I mean, segmented income, good job history, everything was perfect. So I did a PSA to sell. Took both of these to the title company or your closing attorney and let them close it. So again, deed goes here. The note, down payment goes here. And per this line right here in my purchase and sale agreement here, it's assigned to me. So in this kind of transaction, we never own the house, but we're able to suck the profit from the transaction without actually having ownership. So again, we're staying away from ownership. We're staying away from liability. We're able to capture the profit from the transaction without actually owning. Okay. Any questions? Does this make things a little bit more clear? I'm going to take a second. Any questions? Hey, Pat.
Go ahead.
Pat, Marcus, whoever wants to jump in.
How do you collect the money from the down payment? Do they actually cut you a check, and then on a monthly basis they cut you a check? Seems pretty wild.
Yeah, so the down payment goes to the title company, and then the title company will create their HUD, and whatever the profit is on that side would be assigned to us. So yeah, I mean, the title company is going to cut you a check for that. The note, so you'll get the original note is sent to the courthouse, okay, for recording. And so the note and deed of trust is sent for recording, and then you'll get a copy of that. But the only place that we show up is on the assignment. So we're going to get the down payment at closing. We'll get a copy of the note and the assignment at closing, and but we own that note. So I mean, it's ours just as if we own the house beforehand. So I mean, the beauty of this again is we're able to create notes without owning houses.
So then the new buyer will pay you your piece, and then you send the rest to the previous sellers. How does the monthly check break down?
You can do it one of two ways. So the way that we do it, we service all of our own paper. So we have a payment come in from our buyer, and we require them to do money orders. Okay. So that payment's due on the 10th, and then on the 15th, the underlying mortgage payments are due. So, we'll have a $1,300 payment come into us, a $900 payment's written to the underlying, and that difference there is our cash flow.
I gotcha. Okay, so the money doesn't go to the previous seller and then they cut you a check.
No. We can't do that because here's what's going to happen is they're going to keep the money.
Right.
Yeah, they're not going to make the payment.
Right.
I mean, a lot of them will, but some of them won't. Then that's a nightmare.
So it's the same as a subject to in that sense, in the way that the money goes from new buyer to you.
Correct, because the fundamental part of it is subject to this mortgage at $97,000 remains in place.
I gotcha. And you're doing pretty much predominantly all subject threes in your business?
No, I do a mix, but the sub 3 is what I prefer. It's just that if there's a huge equity position, I don't mind to go sub 2 and deal with that, but I do understand that there's more liability there.
But
So it's like, where are you at in terms of the risk tolerance scale?
Gotcha.
I mean, I'm pretty comfortable in my space, but some people starting out, they may not be as much. Okay. Or, and like we'll get into in just a minute, in this transaction, I don't guarantee payments and I don't have to make payments while I'm marketing the house. So it's like, if you're really, really tight on cash, like starting out and that kind of thing, then it's really the best way to start.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, this is amazing.
Oh, thank you. Thank David.
And this type of transaction is to get around the loan origination stuff?
That's part of it. Yeah. So Dodd-Frank, we do not originate.
Okay.
Seller originates.
And that's also the fundamental difference between sub 3 and sub 2.
Well, sub 3 is the flow of paperwork.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have to have subject to have sub 3.
Okay. Yep. I'm confusing myself. Got it.
Yeah. Is the note that you're creating, Brad, a wrap or?
Pat, I don't know if you got cut off there or if that was a full question.
Can you hear? Yeah, sorry. Is the note that you're creating a wrap or all-inclusive deed of trust or?
Yes. So basically on this deal, we got $135,000 price. There's $20,000 down. So I had $115,000 wrap around $97,000.
Okay.
So that $115,000 wrap was assigned to me.
Gotcha.
I think this is pure genius. I have a couple of questions for you. The first one is that if they default, do we get to, I guess we actually go back and I guess, will we be the actual ones to actually foreclose on them, or would the actual original seller have to do it?
Well, we own the note. So if we do foreclose, it would be us that forecloses.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, part of what we're going to get to is we never guarantee payments in this situation. So like I've talked to some of you guys before, I want you to own debt. I don't want you to owe debt. And if we're in the middle of sub 2 wraps all the time, then we're basically owing debt. All right. But we actually disclaim making payments whenever we talk to our seller about this. I'm going to give you the words for that. That's a great question, man. I appreciate that.
And another one, I apologize for coming in a little bit late, but
It's all good, man. It's a rotating door. It's all good.
is this like a special purchase and sell agreement that you have in the back office, or this is something we just actually write in?
So the line 19 is already in the contract to buy. So if you look in the digital asset section of the training, then the contract to buy is there, and then there's a different contract to sell.
Fantastic. I love this. This is good.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, Brad, I'm assuming if you just walked into a random title company and handed them these 2 contracts, they wouldn't know what to do, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So here's kind of the hierarchy of questions that we ask a title company in order to get them comfortable with this, because I just had to do this in North Carolina. It's like, hey, do you guys do assignment of contracts? Yes. Okay. Do you guys close subject to deals? Yes. All right. If I buy a subject to deal, can I then take a second lien position on that subject to deal if I sell it? And the answer is yes. So at that point, then we feel pretty comfortable that we can make them understand this transaction. But the thing that you don't want to do is give them direct instructions, So I had one title company out of state. They wanted to do a reverse assignment of this purchase and sale agreement. So they wanted to take the purchase and sale agreement that I had with my buyer and then revert it back to the seller. And I'm like, whatever. If y'all close it, I don't have to be on title. You sign me the note and deed of trust and the down payment, I'm good. I never really understood that. Do you guys have a good title company in Knoxville, Pat?
No. No, I mean I have a title company that I use, but they won't. None of them around here will touch sub two.
Oh, really? Is that where you're using, I'm guessing, Rudy?
Yes, sir.
All right, cool. Well, that makes sense then. Rudy said that this was too complicated for them to figure out.
Gotcha.
Anybody else have anything?
Who do you use in Nashville to do this?
I use Bob Notstein, the attorney, and I use Toro Title, Matt Anderson.
Awesome.
I guess if I'm in Tennessee, I can use that title company, couldn't I?
Absolutely. They'll do it. Absolutely.
How much they charge? They charge on both ends.
I don't really remember. It's just a kind of a standard rate. They don't charge extra for this. I mean, it's much cheaper to do this than like a finance thing where you're getting a mortgage and all the junk fees and origination fees and all that. So it's not expensive.
Do you use Bob for your foreclosures as well?
When we have foreclosures, I have. Yeah.
Okay. I use him for evictions, so that's just odd. When you said that, I was like, oh, okay.
Bob's great, man. I really like
Yeah,
Bob. We get lunch every once in a while.
Cool.
Hey, Brad, this is Raphael.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, I got a question. When you go to when you go to close the transaction at the title company, from us working in the past, there's a disclosures and things that both the buyer and seller sign. Do you usually or typically experience the buyer asking a lot of questions or just signing it? Because I told you at the showings, I've had people ask, "So is this owner carry?" Or they ask very specific questions. I porcupine it, but
Yeah.
at the closing table, it's a different ball game. They actually have to sign the disclaimers, So
Yeah. I think that it's just kind of an expected thing that when you go to closing, you're going to have documents to sign that are CYA documents. So like even the title company has like their document that if there's clerical errors, then they have the ability to change documents and hold harmless agreements and all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's just a part of the paperwork. Now, there was one time I was pretty concerned because I had a buyer that called and asked if they could bring their attorney to closing. And I was like, well, what do you say? You can't say no, you can't, because that's an obvious issue. It's like, yeah, bring them on, and I'm happy to meet with you guys. So I actually went to that closing, and the guy was an immigration attorney. And I was like, well, I don't know how much he knows about real estate, but he kind of pretended to look at the documents and just said, well, yeah, I mean, this all looks fine. And I was like, well, okay. But to answer your question, no, I've never had an issue in terms of closing. And I'm sure I will at some point. So.
Have you had to foreclose on any of these?
Yes. I mean, we're actively foreclosing on a church and foreclosing on a house in Deer Lodge, Tennessee.
So how does that work in this scenario?
Well, it's no different. We own the note just as if we had lent the cash. Like if we had $200,000 in cash and lent somebody $200,000 in a first position note in deed of trust, it's really no different. So the foreclosure process is the foreclosure process.
But because it's you've got underlying sub 2, you are just remarketing everything. Once it's foreclosed, you remarket to sell it again.
Well, yeah, and it's really two questions. So like what happens in the event of a default? I mean, the first thing is that we try to work with people. So if someone has a life situation in which makes it to where they can't make payments, they get into a car accident, they get sick, they have a divorce, whatever that is. If they'll talk to us, then my first resort is always to do an in-house loan modification. So if they're 3 payments behind, it's like, hey, can you make the next month payment? Yes. Okay. Well, I'm going to put the payments on the back end of the loan. You make next month payment, but if you don't make next month payment, I'm starting the foreclosure process. And so that's usually like step 1. Step 2, if they're still in default, then I'll do kind of a cash for keys scenario. It's like, look, you put $20,000 down on this house. I'll give you $5,000 back if you deed it back to me. But in the meantime, while you're still living here, I've got to show the house. So what I'm going to do is they're going to get their $5,000 when they get out. Okay. But they're going to go ahead and put a deed in escrow at the attorney's office, and we're going to go ahead and market the house with owner financing. And so that $5,000 is going to come from my buyer's down payment. Okay. So again, I'm trying to conserve cash in order to make these transactions happen. And it's a better deal for them. You know, it's like, what do you want? Do you want to get foreclosed on and possibly a deficiency judgment? And I'm going to like become the Grim Reaper following you around for the next 20 years? Or do you want $5,000? You know, I've only had like 3 people that I've actually had to foreclose on. And 2 of those were because they got IRS liens. So that an IRS lien came in second position. So if they deeded me third position, I was in second, it came in third. So if they deeded me the property, then I would have this lien attached that I would have to foreclose out. So, I mean, they were willing to deed it back to me. They just didn't. The one that I'm foreclosing on right now would be the one that I've had in my entire career where the guy just won't listen to reason. And the thing is that, so to put numbers to the deal, we bought it for 50. We owner financed it for 175. He has taken the position of the house, which was kind of a mess when I sold it to him. There were like 300 used tires on the property. It was a house. It was like a 2,200 foot house and 8 acres, a detached garage. He did an apartment above the garage, did a $4,000 landscaping package. He hasn't paid his payment. Like, he took my collateral position from like, I don't know, 175 to 240, you know? So yeah, that's not ideal, but in terms of the foreclosure, it's not a big deal.
Hope you shook his hand when you left.
What was that?
I said, I hope you shook his hand when he left.
Well, I'm still in the middle of that when he filed bankruptcy.
Oh.
Yeah.
I have
Any other?
another question for you. And sorry, I probably started the whole foreclosure thing. That was my fault.
No, that's fine.
When would you not do this? Because you said some of these you do and some of these you don't. But it seemed like, just from me, but I'm still a beginner, it would almost seem like I would want to do this almost every time.
Well, do I want to do this every time? Absolutely. But the main reason why I'm not doing this, well, it's 2. The first one is, if my equity position is so high that I don't want to jeopardize the deal by telling the seller I've got to put a buyer in place. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is when I don't have time. So if there's a situation where we're racing against a foreclosure date, you know, we have less than 30 days for a foreclosure, then I'm going to start to seriously doubt whether I can pull this off, because, you know, I have to have time to put a buyer in place, to verify the facts of that buyer, and then pull title, get everything done, and then go to closing, versus I know I can close things in like 3 days and sometimes 2. So it just depends. But that's a good question.
What do you do if you have one that you close fast enough to take title on? Are you always going to retail out of it and never originate?
No. So in Tennessee, I believe you can originate 4 loans per person. So, you know, I've kind of done it both ways. So I'll do 4 myself. I'll have my wife do 4. Then I'm starting to call friends or family members and have them originate. You know, so like that's one way to do it. I'll put title in their name and just move on down the road in terms of the origination, because there's no issue if you're less than, say, 4 transactions in terms of Dodd-Frank. And it's a state-by-state issue. All right. Do I think the origination issue it's kind of like the big bad wolf that nobody really ever sees. And does it happen sometimes? I guess it does, but I've personally never known. Like, I have a friend that does over 200 owner finance deals per year, and he originates everything. And, you know, he just doesn't care. And I have personally spoken to the state attorney general about this, and he's basically said, like, Brad, if you're not like, how did he put it? If you're not involved in sex trafficking or moving heroin or cocaine and originating, then my office probably doesn't really care.
Yeah.
Is that 4-person loan, is that, by the way, that's hysterical, but is the 4 loans per person, is that like calendar year, or is that just in total?
It's any rotating for 12 months.
Hey, Brad, it's Raphael.
Yes, sir.
One more question before I have to turn my phone off. On the back end, once you actually close on it, since you're holding a note now, do you have any requirements to report to, say, credit bureaus and stuff to, I don't know, much like a bank, so they could build their credit or refi out or anything like that? Are you required to do that?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, we don't, and nobody that I know does. So, but that brings up a great point in terms of us getting our note paid off. And guys, whenever you have a portfolio of notes, you're going to have some that you want to pay off and some that you don't. And the difference there is going to be your return on equity position. So, as an example, like I have one note that's like $14,000, but it's yielding $600 a month. Like I would never ever want that to pay off. Versus the one that we just picked up Saturday, it's a $102,000 note that's throwing off $1,200 a month. Yeah, we probably do want that to pay off because I can take 102,000 and probably, I mean, got it. I could just buy a free and clear rental and do better than 1,200. I mean, there's nothing wrong with like 15% yield or whatever it is, but we could do better. So the return on your equity is going to depend or decide for you whether you want that note to cash out. But it's easier to get a refinance loan than it is a purchase mortgage. So if we can show a series of payments that have been made on time and basically sign an affidavit stating that fact, it's going to benefit our borrower in terms of getting them refinanced out.
Hey, Brad, I have one question for you, and this kind of getting a little bit off of a little sidetrack. As far as like a buyer is concerned, how well do you qualify your buyer?
Yeah, so we're going to do, so our next training is on going to war with the iBuyers in terms of negotiation. So how can we do deals where we can't offer 90% of value like Open Door does? The one after that is going to be straight on selling with owner financing, okay? But the short answer is I'm looking at cash and cash reserves. So I want a down payment, I want cash reserves after the fact, and I want an income that substantiates the payment. So in terms of anything other than that, I really don't really care. The down payment satisfies a good chunk of it, and then I want to make sure that they don't have a $2,000 per month income trying for a $1,400 house payment. I don't want to put people in a bad position. Cool. Anything else on this, guys? I'm happy to talk about this as long as you guys want to. All right, cool. So we're going to move on. So I've gone through this pretty much already, but the main benefits, number one, we're not making payments while we get this thing sold. So like that's one of the big things for me when I started. I didn't have enough money to take on a $700 house payment, okay? I had like literally $300 in the bank on my first closing. Payments are not guaranteed if the buyer defaults. So we actually disclaim in case that happens, all right? And I'm going to go through the sub 3 close here in just a minute. Guys, what makes the sub 3 deal is two things, the sub 3 close and the line item in our purchase and sale agreement that says in the event of an assignment of contract, we get the profit, okay? But we're not guaranteeing payments if the buyer defaults. There's no ownership and there's no liability. Now I say no in parentheses. There's no such thing as no liability, okay? It's like you drive a car down the road, you have the ability to have liability. But I think it's as riskless as real estate can possibly be. All right. We never own the property. We're just assigned profits in the event of a closing. We never guarantee payments. It's really, really clean in terms of liability, but there's no such thing as no liability. And then there's no origination. So, I mean, this is kind of a hang up for a lot of people. And I don't really understand, especially if they understand this model, but we're not originating, guys. In this transaction, we do not originate. Our seller originates and assigns us the note in deed of trust or the note in the mortgage, okay? So we're not originating, so there's no Dodd-Frank issue for us. We're just receiving a document and a down payment, and that's about as clear and clean as we can possibly make something, okay? All right, so this is something I want to go over just real quick. Is the negative sell. And so it's kind of like the basics of social value and frame. If you guys can remember a time when a certain boyfriend or girlfriend played hard to get, y'all ever had that happen? I mean, I know for me, it drove me absolutely crazy, and so the sub 3 close is kind of like being a stuck up, beautiful person that's hard to get. All right. And it really comes to the basics of frame and social value. So, I mean, our frame is high, our social value is high, Because when we're going through the sub 3 close, it's not like this thing of, well, let me tell you how I can help you. It's, look, I don't even know if I can get this done. Okay. So we're pulling away and they start to chase us. People chase what runs away from them. And so that's the basics of the sub 3 close. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, I know that this is a lot. Okay. And, but this is what I say word for word. And I think the words matter. Okay. So in terms of this, I'm just going to go through it in terms of the way that I say it. This is being recorded, so you guys can go through it, and the PDF will be available for you guys as well. So it's like some of you guys have acquisition people out on the field. I would absolutely have them listen to this stuff and learn it word for word. So the way that I kind of talk to people, it's like if I can't go into a certain part of this and then finish the rest of the sentence, then they don't know it well enough. All right. So we're with our seller. We know their walkaway money. Okay. We've gone through the property, everything. And it's like, let me tell you what I can do with this. And honestly, the numbers are really tight. But the best I can do is set up my buyer to take over payments. So how it works is I'll do the purchase agreement with you today to get the house sold. Now, I buy and sell houses. I don't buy and hold. So as soon as I have that agreement with you, I'm going to turn around and market to find my buyer. Now, right now in real estate, it generally takes XYZ time to sell a house. Generally with what I do, I can put my buyer in place in about 3 or 4 weeks. So in about 4 weeks, you're going to get a call from me saying, here's the title company, the closing attorney that we work with, and the house is sold. Now, my buyer makes payments to my loan servicing company, and my loan servicing company turns around and makes payments on the underlying mortgage. And so what that means is that the mortgage will remain in place temporarily after closing. So I need you to understand that. Okay. So at that point, we do like a 3-4 second pause. So we're going to let them kind of digest it. All right. And then we're going to go into 2 situations that they either are already thinking or they should be. And then we're going to go into a disclaimer. Okay. So the key parts to this, I'm going to go through real quick. Today and sold. Okay. So we want to emphasize those. This is just kind of going through the basics of like, we buy and sell houses, we don't buy and hold. Because otherwise they're thinking, well, why does he have to put a buyer in place? It's like, look, we buy and sell houses, we don't buy and hold. So it makes perfect sense. Okay. We're going to go ahead and market to find our buyer. We're giving them a time frame in 3 to 4 weeks. I really like to emphasize here the attorney. Okay. So it's almost like we have a third party that's sort of like blessing the transaction. It's like the closing attorney that we work with, and we're going to close, the house is sold. Now, my buyer makes payment, and we go through the rest of it. Okay. But I want to really emphasize the attorney part here. And so we have to let them digest at the end that this mortgage is remaining in place. Okay. So we're setting expectations, which we've talked about in terms of a couple of weeks ago, dealing with squirrely sellers, setting the right expectations moving forward. We've told them exactly what we're going to do. We're going to put our buyer in place because we buy and sell houses. We don't buy and hold. Our closing attorney, we're going to close. The house is sold. And so I need you to understand that the mortgage will remain in place temporarily after closing. So I need you to understand that. So any questions on this so far? I know that's a mouthful, but it is important. Any questions?
Hey, Brad.
All right. Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, what about where it says the mortgage will remain in place temporarily? Because isn't it going to just continue to remain in place until it's paid off?
Well, that's correct, but that is also temporarily. But we're going to go over that in the next page. That's a good question, though. See, you're already thinking like a smart seller, man.
Perfect.
That's perfect. All right, cool. Anybody else have anything? All right, we're going to roll with it. So generally, we get a couple questions at this point. First is, how long will that mortgage remain in place? And I wish I had a crystal ball, but I can't guarantee a date. And we really don't make much on this transaction until we get the buyer either to sell the house or refinance. So we really try hard to get that done. But we shoot for 18 to 36 months. Okay, so that's kind of a window. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, but that's kind of a general average for us. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. This is going to kind of take care of Chad's question to the best of our ability. So we want to give them a range. I can't give them a date. And what they're hearing from us is still the negative sell. So we're not trying to promise them something. And we're certainly not going to try to set them up for an expectation that can't be met, because we don't have the deed. We can't guarantee when this thing's going to pay off. Okay. But people at this point, they're already in a situation that's tough, because generally these are the lower equity situations, and they know that we're honest and we're not trying to like hoodoo them or tell them an untruth. Okay. And we really get to that in the second part here. The second question we get is, what happens if the buyer stops making the payments? And that's a great question. What's always happened in the past is we continue to service that underlying mortgage. We repossess the house from that buyer, and we just resell it. The person in your situation never knew that there was an issue. Okay. So again, we're talking about what happens if the buyer stops making the payments. We really want to emphasize your situation, because we're bringing it to bear once again that they're in a situation that's a tough one. Okay. So then we start to go into the disclaimer. So with everything today, there's a disclaimer. So like you go to McDonald's, I either say McDonald's or Starbucks, depending on what demographic I'm in front of. You go to McDonald's and it says caution, coffee hot, as if we didn't know. So here's my disclaimer. If Great Depression #2 happens, or if World War III happens, and I get 60 or 70 or 80 houses back in 1 month, I can handle it for a while. Well, I don't guarantee that you don't get a call from me saying, hey, Mr. Seller, I've had to take a bunch of houses back in 1 month. You're going to have to make a few months payments until I get this thing resold. That could happen. Now, it hasn't happened. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's like the whole thing of never say never. But if you're ready to get the house sold, I think we can get this done. Okay. So I kind of put it in both places, but we're disclaiming that we're not guaranteeing that the payments are made. All right. And this is powerful, because in their heart, they know that it's not guaranteed anyway. So it's like, what's our other solution? What's our other option here? It's like, well, let me go and tell them something that they know is probably not true anyway. Well, I guarantee I'm going to make the payments. It'll always be made. And then they start thinking in their head, well, what happens if this guy get cancer? He dies. You know, I mean, that happens. That's a life situation, you know, that we deal with all the time when we buy. So we can't put ourselves in a situation where we are talking about things that we can't reasonably take care of. Okay. So we're not guaranteeing payments. We're not guaranteeing a date when this thing is paid off. We have to set the correct expectations, because if we have a pain situation on the front, we're going to have a big pain situation on the back end. And that's not something that I want for you guys. Any questions on the sub-3 close? So it's kind of lengthy, but I think you kind of get the idea. So we're telling them we're going to put our buyer in place before we close. We're talking about the mortgage remaining in their name for an extended amount of time. We're talking about how what will happen if the buyer stops paying. And we're talking about that we're not guaranteeing that the payments are made. Any questions?
Is that any different than the sub-2 close?
The sub-2 close is going to have parts of this. Yeah.
All right, stupid question coming. If they
No,
don't,
not at all. Go ahead.
if they happen to not bring any of that up, do we, willingly just say, hey, FYI, or here's our disclaimer anyway, because you don't want to scare them, but at the same time, if they don't have those questions, I guess legally you probably should.
I think you generally should, but there's always an exception. If I feel comfortable and really confident in the deal, then I don't mind guaranteeing payments. Okay. To the extent, and I have tons of life insurance and all of that. And if I'm putting a buyer in a position where the cash flow is so strong that I just can't foresee anything to where that could happen, a Great Depression #2 situation would actually help us in a lot of ways. We would buy incredible assets at amazing terms. But I guess the short answer is it depends. But in general, I would If I'm doing the sub 3 close, I'm absolutely going this direction every time.
Okay, so if they didn't, and I probably didn't word my question correctly. If they don't, like you say, so generally I get a couple of questions at this point. If they don't have those questions, do we bring this stuff up to them?
Yeah. So if I'm in a situation, where I'm exempting this is if I'm buying it subject to myself and I'm going to take it retail or something like that. But if I'm in a situation where I'm doing the sub 3 close, I'm putting my buyer in place first, then yeah, I'm going through this, because if they're not thinking it, then they should. And in my states, I'm recording this conversation, because if I have a forgetful seller, then they say, well, I didn't know the mortgage was going to remain in place. And then it's like, well, and I'll probably tell the seller, well, this is what I say every single time. So this is what I told you. And then and I've never had this happen, but just in case, if I get on the stand, the first thing I'm going to do when the opposing counsel starts asking me questions is I'm just going to take out my phone and start playing.
Perfect.
So, that's a great question, though. Anything else on this? Questions, thoughts, concerns? All right, cool. So I went through the disclaimer. So when is sub 3 appropriate? So it's definitely in low equity situations, or in situations where you want little liability and little cash outlay. Because we don't have closing costs before we have our buyer, we don't have payments before we have our buyer, all of that. And this is just where I had to start. My first, I don't know, probably 3 dozen transactions were just like this. Flow of the paperwork. I guess to recap it would be this. In the sub 2 wrap, it goes from seller to investor to our buyer. Where with sub 3, we're going seller to buyer, and then this is going to investor. And that's kind of the difference. Okay, we're not stuck in the middle here. That's all I got, guys. Happy to answer any questions. We'll keep it sub 3 or transactional related or owner finance related to begin with. And then I'll open it up after I stop the recording, and we can talk about really whatever you guys want to talk about.
I guess my issue with all these is just finding the buyer in a timely manner. I had one in Woodbine, 100% financed. And I had a couple buyers that were looking super good, and then all those fell through, and I ended up taking one like 2 months later just because I was tired of making the payments, and just like $100 cash flow with a little bit of equity, which was great. That was my first one, but I think I could have done way better, and it's been really hard for me.
So what was the last thing you said there? It kind of broke up.
It's just been hard for me to find buyers, and I have 2 under contract, one in Alabama and one in Van Deer, which is like 2 hours away from here, just outside Nashville City. And I have no idea even how to approach finding a buyer in a timely manner. I have to close on the one in Van Leer next Friday. So I'm just thinking take it subject to, but then do I want to take that risk of having to make those payments, not being able to find a buyer, having too little equity? Those are my problems I have right now.
Yeah, so we're definitely going to, so not the next training, but the training after that, we're going to do everything selling, marketing with owner financing.
Amazing.
And we're 2 weeks out on that, so we'll definitely touch on that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to JV that one, I'm happy to. I appreciate your.
Yeah, I'm still looking at that, man. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm still looking at that.
I appreciate
I hadn't forgot about you.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thanks. For sure.
I think it'll be fine.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. Anybody else? Questions, thoughts, concerns? I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. Appreciate y'all being with us.